And so next we would like to welcome the author of Drinking with the Saints. Dr. Michael P. Foley was born and raised in Southern California, went to school in Northern California, and did his graduate work at Boston College, where he earned his PhD in Catholic theology. Dr. Foley taught for 3 years at Notre Dame and then took a job in the great texts at Baylor University, where he has lived for the past 10 years with his wife and 6 children. His previous works include Ever Ancient, Ever New, Ruminations on the City, the Soul, and the Church, Wedding Rites, The Complete Guide to Traditional Vows, Music, Ceremonies, Blessings, and Interfaith Services, a translation of St. Augustine's Confessions, and the popular Why Do Catholics Eat Fish on Friday? The Catholic origin to just about everything. Dr. Foley has also authored over 150 articles on subjects ranging from faith to film to church history. Please help me to welcome Dr. Foley.
Thank you very much. It is a delight to be here. Well, that was a tough act to follow. In ancient Greek theater, they would have the tragedy first, the serious theater, followed by farcical comedy. And perhaps it was providential that the organizers had me follow Cardinal Zen. I do not have anything half as profound to say. And my topic was hope, or it still is. And we just saw a living demonstration of hope. He did, however, mention Napoleon, and it does remind me of another story from the Bloody Little Corporal. In 1799, Napoleon's murderous army was on the march through Europe when it came upon the small town of Feldkirch, Austria. Napoleon ordered one of his generals to take the town. And so, on Easter Sunday morning, as the sun shone upon the dew and the villagers made their way to Mass, they looked up to see 18,000 soldiers in the surrounding hills. Immediately, the town called an emergency meeting. What were they to do? All agreed that it was futile to resist the overpowering forces frowning down upon them. One suggested that they surrender, that they send an emissary to the French camp with a plea for mercy. As the debate continued, the venerable pastor of the village arose. His words were direct and compelling. My children, this is Easter. Don't you think that God, who rose from a grave, can protect us in our trouble? Will our first act when trouble comes be to forsake him, neglect him? Of ourselves we are powerless. Against the mighty army of the enemy we can make no resistance. Why not go to church, celebrate Easter as we usually do, and trust in God for the rest? And so to church they went, accompanied by the clamor of every bell in the town. The sextons had been ordered to ring as long and as loudly as they always did on Easter. The people thronged the streets and crowded into the churches with the same joyful, triumphant spirit of every other resurrection day. The invading French heard the jubilant bells. They saw the brightly dressed villagers hurrying to church. Surely, the village must have received reinforcements, or word that the Austrian army was near and ready for their defense. The French general ordered an immediate retreat, thanks to the Easter bells of Feldkirch. Our own world today is not so different from the near siege of Feldkirch. We are surrounded on every side by enemies, minions of tyranny of one kind or another. The temptation is to throw up one's hands, to give in and to give up, to take a fatalistic view of things and cry, the job is too great. We can never get ourselves out of this mess. The people of Feldkirk had every reason to indulge in such despair, but they didn't. They had Christian hope, and that hope led them to ring the bells. And that is our solution to today's problems as well, to have hope. But what is hope? How do we get it? And how do we keep it? We can start by talking about what hope is not. Hope is not optimism. Now, don't get me wrong. There is nothing wrong with optimism. We Americans, for example, are an optimistic lot, and I, for one, am grateful for that. I come from Irish stock, and while the Irish are wonderful people, they are not exactly renowned for their optimism. It's no coincidence that Murphy's Law, anything that can go wrong will go wrong, is named after an Irishman. So I'm grateful to be an American, and grateful that when my ancestors came to these shores and breathed the air of freedom and believed the claim that America is a land of opportunity, they became more optimistic. But still, optimism is not hope, and it cannot substitute for Christian hope. So what is the difference? Social psychologists tend to think of optimism as an attitude that is based on evidence, while hope is an attitude that persists despite the evidence. According to this line of thought, for example, fans of top-performing sports teams are optimistic, while fans of poorly performing sports teams are hopeful. Now, having lived in Texas for the past 15 years, I am not from these here parts, so forgive me if I get this wrong, but I've been told that fans of the Yankees are optimistic, while fans of the Mets are hopeful. Is that right? I'm sure I'll be corrected afterwards if I'm not. A more interesting example is a study that was conducted with 105 Israelis who had been injured in terrorist attacks, and how they and their spouses dealt with the trauma. They found that hope and optimism worked quite differently with each spouse and each case. The most successful couples were the ones where the victim had hope and his or her spouse had optimism. The least successful couples were the opposite. The victim had optimism and the spouse had hope. Now, you have to sort of think about this. Let's walk through it. Think of a successful couple first. When an injured victim saw that his or her spouse was optimistic, it conveyed the sense that everything was going to be okay, and this was reassuring. Similarly, when the spouse saw the victim filled with hope despite all of his or her injuries and sufferings, it was inspirational. But when the victim saw that his spouse had hope, it implied that the evidence for a likely recovery was bad, and that was discouraging. And when a spouse saw that the victim had optimism, that was bad too, because it meant the victim was being delusional. So optimism and hope do indeed work differently. I find these contrasts very interesting and useful. However, I also think they don't go far enough, at least with respect to the mystery of Christian hope. Obviously, what I'm speaking about today is Christian hope, not just sort of garden variety sports team hopes or whatever. Christian hope is, by definition, a supernatural virtue. And so it's going to be different from hope as we use that in a regular form of speaking. One thing that I think that's wrong with what I've just told you is that attitudes like optimism and pessimism, in a sense, are not based on data. They are based on approaches to data. Consider the classic definition of an optimist as someone who looks at a glass containing 50% water and says the glass is half full, while a pessimist says it is half empty. Both people are looking at exactly the same data, but they are interpreting it differently because of their different attitudes. As for the theological virtue of hope, it seems to me that a person whom God has blessed with Christian hope is not looking to data either. He is looking to a person. He's looking to God. Spera in Deo, hoping God, we pray at the foot of the altar at the beginning of every Latin Mass. Hope is not so much a way of interpreting evidence as it is trust in a divine person and in his promises, regardless of the evidence. Whereas an optimist thinks that things will get better, and a pessimist thinks that things will get worse, the hopeful Christian believes that things can get better and worse, maybe at the same time, but that the worst possible outcome, whatever it is, will give way to the best possible finale, a new heaven and a new earth. When in the Old Testament, Job's friends tried to interpret the data in a particular way, pointing out the misfortunes that had befallen him, he gave neither an optimistic point of view nor a pessimistic, but simply said, I know that my Redeemer liveth, and in the last day I shall rise out of the earth, and I shall be clothed again with my skin, and in my flesh I will see my God. I myself shall see him, and my eyes shall behold him, and not another. This is my hope, and it is laid up in my bosom. If you were to ask Job whether the glass was half empty or half full, he would tell you he didn't know, and that even if someone smashed the glass to the ground and spilled the water everywhere, God will restore the glass on the last day and fill it to the brim. I have suggested that hope is not a way of interpreting evidence, but is a trust in God the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. But to clarify, I do not mean that hope has nothing to do with evidence. Hope is most important when the evidence seems to mount against us or against our Catholic faith. This morning after the beautiful Mass at St. Vincent Ferrer, I noticed a prayer in front of the statue to St. Vincent, and it includes the line, should sorrow and trials increase, so also will my hope. That about sums it up. Should the sorrows and trials increase, so also will my hope. The virtue of faith points us in the right direction. It points us to our destination. It is the North Star to which we should navigate our lives. But on our journey, we are beset by obstacles. Storms on the sea of life attack our little ship and toss it to and fro. It is hope that responds to these obstacles by avoiding two extremes. First, it avoids the sin of despair, that sad vice which tells us to give up, to stop the journey because it is too hard. Second, it avoids the sin of presumption, that smug vice which tells us that we don't have to worry about taking the dangers of the sea seriously In fact, we're already at our destination, and we can just go ahead and stop struggling. Hope ignores both of these false voices and perseveres. It overcomes its fear and stays the course. One of the most popular symbols for hope in Christian art is an anchor, and rightly so. The idea is that an anchor keeps a ship in the same location despite the battering of waves or currents. But we should also think of hope as helping us move forward in the right direction to our final port, like the strong hand of a navigator on a sturdy tiller. I've said that Christian hope is a trust in the divine person and in his promises. Pray for us, O Holy Mother of God, we pray, that we may be made worthy of the promises of Christ. What exactly are those promises? St. Augustine has a nice way of answering this question. The Creed, Augustine says, gives us the articles of faith. But it is the Lord's Prayer that gives us the articles of hope. There are 7 petitions in the Our Father. Hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come. Thy will be done. Give us our daily bread. Forgive us our trespasses. Lead us not into temptation. Deliver us from evil. Together, these 7 petitions express our hope for good things that we hope to attain in this life or the next. Those are the articles of our hope. We have both temporal and eternal hopes. As Catholics, we believe that Christian hope is one of the 3 theological virtues that are infused into our soul by God Himself at our baptism. The good news is that unlike most other good habits that we call virtues, this tremendous gift is not acquired through long and arduous effort, but gained in an instant. The bad news is that it can just be lost just as quickly through a single mortal sin. So to keep this from happening, we need to cultivate and foster, practice and nourish the gift of hope that we have been given. Let me conclude by suggesting 3 ways that we can do so. First, we need to read the signs of hope in our lives, but without being beholden to them. Let me explain what I mean. When I look at the world, or even the church, I do see many reasons for despair. But I also see extraordinary signs of hope. I see my students at Baylor University coming to the faith or deepening their faith. I see my fellow parishioners praying and taking their faith seriously in a way that I did not see when I was growing up. Now, I grew up in California, so that may be part of the problem. I see the writings of Father George Rutler and the courageous witness of Cardinal Zen. And I see the growth of the traditional Latin Mass. It occurred to me just this week that I have now spent a little more than half my life as a Latin Mass Catholic. I'm almost 50 years old, and it was at the age of 24 that I first attended a Tridentine Mass. In that time, or since that time, I have seen the Mass, the old Mass, go from being seen as the crazy aunt locked up in the attic to an acknowledged member of the family who is allowed to join them at dinner. Now, she is still far from being the belle of the ball, but she has gone this far in 25 years, and that for me is a great sign of hope. Still, as much as I cherish these signs of hope, I cannot base my hope on them. Almighty God gives His saints and His children dark nights of the soul and periods of spiritual dryness. where he removes consolations from us in order to test our resolve and strengthen it. We should not despair during these dark moments, for our hope is in the person of Jesus Christ, not the signs and wonders that he works. St. Hildegard of Bingen has the beautiful description of hope. Hope, she writes, is the sweet beholder of the living eye who is the Son of God. No deceitful torpor can deceive it. Darkness cannot cloud its gaze. I like that phrase, deceitful torpor, suggesting a paralysis or lack of action. It brings us back to that idea of hope persistently moving forward, despite the lying voices of despair and presumption which tell it to stop. For it does not matter if the signs are against us and things do not look good. Our hope is not in events, but in God and his Holy Mother. Think of how easy it would have been in AD 313 to be a Christian and to read the signs of the times and to conclude that there was little hope for the Catholic Church. For sure, the Church would survive the current Roman persecution, just as it had survived earlier waves of persecution. But everyone knew it would remain a tiny persecuted minority until the end of time. Then, out of the blue, strange reports from out of the West start to reach Christian ears. The ruler of the western part of the empire, some guy named Constantine, has suddenly declared toleration for all Christians under his dominion. More than that, he announced that he himself was a disciple of Christ. Apparently, he had had a dream that told him to take a Christogram into battle, a sign with the first two letters of Christ, Chi and Rho, and he would be victorious. Constantine did, and he was. Such a thing could not have been predicted. And you can imagine the swelling hope of all Christians before it soon came crashing down again. For when the ruler of the eastern part of the empire, Licinius, heard of this edict of toleration coming from the west, he feared that Christians under his rule would rise up against him and take Constantine's side. So he basically began to view Christians within his borders the way the federal government during World War II viewed Japanese Americans. Every one of them was a potential spy, a saboteur, an insurrectionist. Licinius therefore initiated a fresh wave of persecution against Christians, putting, for example, bishops like St. Nicholas of Myra, otherwise known as Santa Claus, under house arrest. Things were once again bleak, when behold, more weird news. Constantine defeated Licinius in a final decisive battle, again using the Cairo as his military standard, which apparently confused and frightened Licinius's troops. In AD 324, the entire Roman Empire, under the rule of Constantine, was now officially in favor of Christians. At that point, in less than 100 years, the Catholic Church would go from persecuted pariah to the official religion of the world's largest empire at the time, and its membership would climb from 2 million believers to 34 million. No one could have predicted that in AD 313. On the other hand, not to bring us down, no Englishman at the start of the 16th century could have predicted what was in store for his church in the same period of 100 years. In the Middle Ages, few countries were more Catholic than England. Its devotion to the Mother of God was so strong that it was nicknamed Our Lady's Dowry. And it all because one monarch who wrote treatises against Martin Luther in defense of purgatory and was subsequently named by the Pope Defender of the Faith, all because he could not sire a male child, and it was his fault. He kept blaming the women, but it was his fault. All because he could not sire a male child and hooked up with a Protestant mistress, England would embark on a centuries-long persecution of the Catholic faith in her own country, in Ireland, and even in the New World. Imagine being St. Thomas More in 1535, or St. Edmund Campion during the reign of Queen Elizabeth I, and being asked to read the sign of the times. And yet, although England has not returned to the faith as a whole, she did stop persecuting Catholics in the 19th century, and in the 20th century was home to some of the finest Catholic authors the world has ever known. Men like St. John Henry Newman, Hilaire Belloc, G.K. Chesterton, Ronald Knox, Evelyn Waugh, and Graham Greene. Within the past few months, the Queen's personal chaplain has converted to Catholicism. Think about that one. She's the head of the Church of England. And your own chaplain, as we would say in Texas, popes. In Texas, pope is a verb as well as a noun. So, swim the tide was too long for a Texan to say. So when someone converts to Catholicism, we say they poped. And for the first time since 1381, the bishops of England and Wales, at the end of March this year, will rededicate England to Our Lady under the title of Our Lady's Dowry. My point is this: Catholics need to have hope whether the sun is shining on them or not, whether the signs look good or not. For our hope is not a form of meteorology. We are not forecasting the weather based on the signs, even if the signs do encourage us at times. For you never know what God, in His merciful providence, has in store for us. The Lord makes His rain to rain upon the just and the unjust, and His sun to shine on the just and the unjust. So my first practical piece of advice is enjoy the signs, but don't be beholden to them. Second, we need to pray and strive continually, not only to maintain our hope, but to increase it. Our goal is not to keep the status quo, but to build upon our hope and make it stronger than ever before. One way to do this is to immerse ourselves in the marinade of the traditional liturgical year, which is an amazing treasure. I personally find the annual cycle of readings to be a very meaningful way to grow in my practice of the faith. The goal of every Mass is not necessarily, in my opinion, a Bible study. The goal is to glorify God and to sanctify man. The traditional rite is ingenious in both respects. By returning annually to the same themes and readings, it acts as a spiritual massage therapist, rubbing you with the same actions and lessons over and over until you become more pliable and open to God. Or to throw even more bizarre metaphors at you, the old calendar is a wise teacher, an affirming life coach, and an exacting drill sergeant all rolled into one. I do not know if this was intentional on the part of the conference organizers or just another example of God's providence, but the season of Septuagesima, or pre-Lent, that we are currently in the traditional calendar, affords us an excellent example of what I am saying, and an excellent opportunity to renew our faith, hope, and love. This season of Septuagesima, which began last Sunday, We'll end next Sunday with St. Paul's beautiful epistle on faith, hope, and love. Love is patient, love is kind. That beautiful reading. Tomorrow, on the other hand, is Sexagesima Sunday, which in many ways offers a reflection on hope. There are hints of this in the Mass, which I challenge you to find tomorrow, but it is most evident in the Matin readings of the Divine Office, which give us the story of Noah. Noah was not the holiest man in the Old Testament, but he clearly had hope. He trusted the voice of God when it gave him a seemingly insane command to build a giant box and stuff it with the world's animals. And when I say box, I mean it. The ark was barely a ship. It was seaworthy, but it had no sails, no oars, no rudder, no means of navigating. Talk about trusting God. And this massive floating zoo had only one window. Not exactly ideal ventilation. Noah's Ark is considered a type or foreshadowing of the church herself. And there is a story of a medieval scribe who was no doubt thinking about this when he wrote about the conditions on the ark during the flood. The smell inside, he wrote, would have been unbearable were it not for what was happening outside. Remember that the next time a scandal stinks up the bark of St. Peter. So Noah had hope. And when the rains and the waves subsided, he sent out 2 birds to find land. He sent the ungrateful raven, which never came back. Typical raven. And then he sent the dove, who brought back in her beak an olive branch. Noah was looking for signs of hope, but he was not dependent on them. The question on his mind was not if land would appear, but when and where. Learn from Noah and be inspired by him. Third and finally, and this brings us back to that tiny little town in Western Austria, as you foster and cultivate the virtue of hope, ring the bells. Be public and unapologetic about your Catholic Christian identity. The people of Feldkirch did not hide their faith in their God who rose from the dead. They proclaimed it from the highest tower. They publicized their hope in the resurrection with a clear peal of a bell. For if the trumpet give an uncertain sound, St. Paul asks, who shall prepare for battle? Your ringing the bells will not only help to strengthen your own hope, it will encourage the hope of those around you. It will help you all prepare for battle. Ring the bells in your voting, in your shopping. Ring the bells in your kindness and charity to others. Ring the bells in the classroom and in the workplace. Ring the bells with public displays of the symbols of our faith. Above all, ring the bells with your words and with your deeds. And may God grant that those bells transform our beloved country from a nation of optimists to a nation of hope. Thank you.
Dr. Foley, with talents like yours and the service of the faith, I think you're a sign of hope for all of us. Thank you for your beautiful work. And I don't think there's anything anybody can do better than teach the faith. So thank you. Keep up the good work. God bless you.